Okay, so welcome back to another series. So on this one, I'm going to be covering the Mini B, which is the Mini Moog take of Arturia. So this is my first synth tutorial I'm going to do, and this is going to be a series. So it's not that type of video or series where I explain everything in 5 minutes. I'm going to give you a detailed information of everything so you can really learn how to use the synth and create music. That's the idea. Now, this is one of the most legendary synths in history. So if you're starting synthesis or beginning with this, you came to the right place. This synth gives you a great iconic sounds, and it's very easy to learn. And it will teach you the fundamentals of subtractive synthesis. And this is what this synth does, is subtractive. Because we have 3 oscillators which are generating a sound. And then with the filters, you can remove the things that you don't want. You cut the sounds or the frequencies you want to, keep out. So you're subtracting sound from a sound source. So that's why subtractive synth. You just generate a sound and you remove what you don't want. Ergo, subtractive. So we're going to start in this one with the most fundamental parts, which is the oscillators. So what you get is 3 oscillators. And from now, I'm going to show you what I'm going to do every time. I'm going to go to the default and I'm going to go to advanced and go to modulation and remove the modulation. Just turn it off. And we can all start from the same place. So, of course, you get 3 oscillators. Right here from this section, you can turn the oscillators off or on. You can, of course, modulate, modify the volume. And I know that all of this is pretty obvious, but again, this is a very detailed video, so I need to cover. So I'm going to use just the oscillator now, 1 for now. So on each oscillator, you get a range control. And this is like the octave control. So if I play a key, it's just, not playing, and it's because I need to turn it on. You're going to get a sound, right? Cool. Congratulations. So the range control is like the octave control. If I go low, I get a low octave. And I'm pressing the same key. Notice right here, I'm pressing the same key. If I go up, we get a higher pitch, same, and super high. Super simple. You just change the octaves from here. Then you have a low control, which if you press something, you hear kind of a rumble. You don't get much. And it's because this one is used as a modulation source. So we're going to talk about that when we reach the modulation section. So then you have the waveforms. So by default, you get 6 waveforms. You get a saw. Well, actually, it's going to be a triangle. So let me just change it to something we can really hear. You get a triangle. Then you get the saw triangle. And this is very particular to this synth. So this, what it is a blend of a triangle and a saw, right? And it is that you have a triangle kind of a shape, but then you have this tiny peak. So then you have the sawtooth, which is just a saw. And then what you get is a square. Then you get a different square, and then a different square. And the only difference between this 3, the last 3, is the width of the square. We're going to talk about, this about in a minute. Okay. So, of course, you get 5 different waveforms, 6 different waveforms. And notice that this one is not that in your face. And this is how this works. As soon as you go up, you're going to get a much more in your face sound. And again, I'm just trying to explain. I'm assuming you're starting with this. So I'm kind of explaining first everything on lame terms. And then we're going to use much more, appropriate, which is words. Okay. So, with the squares, what you can do, and it's very special to this synthesizer, not something that you get with a real synthesizer, with a real version of this, is that you can modify the width of the square in this case. So I'm on this square, I'm going to press a key, and notice that it says width 0.48. So if you make a right click, and you click and hold, and you drag, you're going to be modifying the width of the square. And if I press something, notice that this will just modify the width. So if you remember, this one is kind of a narrow, just a narrow square. So if I go to this one and I make it narrow, I'm going to be kind of generating the same thing I'm generating right here. And yeah, pretty much. Maybe it was too narrow. So I'm going to go there and say I want to do something maybe like that. Now notice I'm changing the width right here and it gives you the value. Now, if I move out and I go back, it will not remember the width. So always remember that if you change the width of something and if you go out and go back in, you're going to lose the width that you've selected. So always be careful not to lose that value. Now, of course, with Arturia plugins, and this is for all the plugins with Arturia, at the bottom, you get kind of a history control. So if you make a change and you say, oh, damn it, I just changed it and I don't know what the value was, you get it right here. So you can go and just go back to the previous value. Always remember that. It's very useful. Now the question is, can we do the same thing? Can we modify the width of the other ones? Well, of course you can. If I go right here and drag, we can do the same thing with that one, and we can go and do the same thing with this one. Now with the saw, you cannot. Even though it says width, if I drag, nothing is going to happen. So then with the saw, you can change the width, which is going to modify how the shape works, pretty much. And same thing with the triangle. You can modify the shape. Super cool. So that's it. That's the first oscillator. Now what's going to happen with the other oscillators? I'm going to turn this off and I'm going to go to the second one. So on the second one, you get pretty much the same controls. You get the same range. You still get the low. We're going to talk about that later. And then you get the same controls, the same waveforms, and they are exactly the same. You can change the width and everything else. Now, of course, this is an analog synthesizer. So both waveforms, both oscillators are going to sound a little bit different from each other. And this is one of the magic things that you get when you buy an analog synth. The oscillators are very natural. So the sound that they generate, it's always a little bit different, just a little bit different. So the blend of both oscillators, since they are a little bit different, it will just generate a very, analog, warmy sound. So since this is a model plugin, you get the same. So if I go and select this same control right here, notice it says 8 and then 8 and select the same, form, you're going to get something very similar. So I'm going to go and of course turn this on, and I'm going to go and turn the volume on this one. So notice that we get the same, but there's a tiny movement. So here comes this part, which is the fine tune. Notice it says 0 semitones. So what you can do, you can modify by semitones this oscillator. So if I play something and go to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm playing a fifth. So this is the 1 and this is the 5th, because we can modify the sound of this one by semitones, not octaves like we are doing right here. All right, so another thing you can do, I'm going to go and double click and it will go back to the original position. Notice it says fine -1076. What the F is that? So what this will allow you to do is to modify the tuning, the fine tuning, to the notes in between. So instead of doing one full semitone up, is moving between 0 and 1, which is 0, something, 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 until you reach 1, of course. So I'm going to double click, and I'm doing this with the right click, When you double click, it's going to go to find 0. So this oscillator, now it's doing the same thing than the oscillator number 1. And even though I'm playing something, they sound pretty same, but there's kind of a phasing going on. Notice that it sounds weird. So when you play 2 different sound sources, 2 different sounds, even 3 or 4 or 5, if they are the exact same sound, you don't get a different sound. What you get is the same sound, but louder. This is just the basic, how sound works. You don't get a better sound, you don't get a fatter sound, you just get more volume. But in this case, we just don't get, well, of course, we get an increase of volume, but we don't get the same thing. So if I play this one, even though this is the same, when I activate this, it doesn't sound the same. And it's because both oscillators are a little bit different from each other. This is the magic of analog synthesis. So what this gives you is the ability of changing the fine tuning. And this is one trick that we use the whole time. It's just one of the oldest trick in the book. If I right click and I fine tune this one by a little bit, maybe something like that, the sound is going to change massively. Because now this one, it's further from the oscillator number 1, but not enough to be, you know, out of tune. Right? So if I go back, it sounds very dull, but as I provide some fine tuning, we get that sound. Same thing if we go in negative values. Maybe 100, of course, is too much, so we get into that beehive kind of a sound territory. But just a little bit, it will give you a fatter, more, you know, harmonic sound, which is great. Right, so pretty cool. This is, again, the oldest trick in the book. Just detune the second or third or whatever other oscillators you're using just a tiny bit. So what's with the oscillator number 3? Well, with the oscillator number 3, we just get the same controls. You get the 32, 4, 16, 8, you know, the same range. You get the low. Now you get an extra low, which is called a low mono. And again, this belongs to the modulation section. We're going to talk about that later. You're going to get the same waveforms, but there's a difference. Notice that this one, it's not the saw triangular. It's a different one. It's an inverted saw. So now you get a different waveform. How it sounds, pretty much the same. So I'm going to go disable everything and just turn on the third oscillator. Right? That's not much different, but you can see on the oscilloscope that it's, you know, an inverted saw. Right, so that's it. That's the only difference. Now, the oscillator number 3 will become very important when we reach the modulation section. Now, can you do the same thing we were doing with the oscillator number 2? Oh, of course, you can change it by semitones, right? Or you can do the fine tuning. And again, this is again, one of the oldest tricks in the book. If I wanted to play the 3 oscillators, I'm going to go 1, I'm going to go 2, turn them on, and then 3, we're, you know, getting the same sound. So if I go and select the same waveform, I'm going to go double click, I'm going to set the fine to 0 and set the fine to 0, and I'm playing the same range. So we get a super dull sound. But in this one, I'm going to go and do semitone down, and then I'm going to do the fine tuning again and up. And notice that we get a super massive sound. And I have a tiny dumb bass line right here. And we are not doing much. We're just selecting the same exact waveform and doing a little bit of detuning. How simple is to get a nice sound? Now, of course, you cannot argue that it sounds very dull, right? Sounds good, but dull. So, of course, with synthesis or anything that generates a sound, even if we are talking about guitars or drums or any other instrument, it sounds bad or it sounds raw when you are using something like this. You're generating this sound, which is very raw. As soon as you add a little bit of effects, the sound changes. So I'm going to add a little bit of delay and a little bit of reverb. And the sound is going to go full circle. And I'm not doing anything. I'm just doing a little bit of reverb and a little bit of delay. This is the original one, which is pretty dumb, but and it's a really cool sound. Very 90s, of course. So this is how this works. You start working with this, changing a little bit of the values, maybe selecting a different waveform, which is something we can do right now, and get a better sound. Super cool. Maybe change the waveform to something else. Great. And we are not doing anything. We're just changing things a little bit, and we are already getting a very good sound, right? Always remember that the effects like delays or compressors, saturations, reverbs, they will finish the sound that you're, designing, right? So the next section, the next part is going to be this one, the overload. And for this one, I'm going to go to default right here, say default, and start from the scratch. I'm going to go to advanced and turn it off. Okay, so I'm going to go and just use the oscillator number 1, right? I'm going to go there, 8, and then maybe a triangle. And I'm going to play the same dumb bass line. All right. So the overload is a saturation. So on this button right here, you can enable the saturation, not just with the volume, but you can turn it on. Now, and this is a little bit weird. It's very hard to see. This has 3 different positions, not 2, which is out and on. You get off, you get out, and then you get on. And I know, super weird. So off, of course, means off. It doesn't matter what I play. If I go 100% or to 10, you're not getting overload. All right. So the next one is going to be the on, not the on, the out. So if I play this and I do overload, notice that we are getting the overload. Now you cannot argue that it sounds like crap, because it's too much. It's just doing a bit too much. Now on the right side of the synth, you get a soft clipping. So when you do enable this, now the overload, the clipping is going to be a little bit different. It's going to be soft clipping. So if I play this, now we start getting, we get a little bit, not crazy amount of overload. If I go, all the way to 10, we get that, but it's just a different type of saturation. And remember that all of this works a little bit better when you bring, some of the magic, maybe the reverb, the delay, some other oscillator right here. We're gonna detune it just a little bit and maybe go to low. And notice it changes the sound. It changed the sound just a little bit. All right, so that's the overload. So, okay. So of course that's the out position. What is the on? If I play something and I go up, nothing happens. If I do on right here, nothing happens. Now this option, the on, is something that you get, or you might get with any other synthesizer in terms of a hardware synth, a real synth, not a plugin version. So with some synths, you get an out input. So what you can do, you can go at the back right here of the hardware unit, and you can plug in a different source, maybe an audio, right? Maybe I don't know, a different player, or maybe a different synth, or maybe a guitar amp, or whatever it is that you want to feed. But if you can plug in whatever it is that you want, and that sound will go through right here to through the actual synth. Of course, not the oscillators. It will not generate a sound. It will just give the sound, provide a sound to the synth, and it will go through all the process, which is the filters, the loudness, and everything else. So one of the paths is going to be the overload. So that sound that comes in can go to the overload, and you can give it a little bit of saturation. So when it comes out, the sounds that comes out of this synth will have that overload. That's what the on means. I cannot show you this because I have no way to connect some external source to this plugin, at least from this DAW. I'm using Bitwig, and I know I cannot do it from Ableton as well. I believe I've seen people doing it from Cubase, for example. But to be honest, I never had the need to do something like this. I have done this with real synthesizers, with not plugin versions, the hardware units. That's, fun thing to do, but on the plugin version, this is just unnecessary, in my opinion. All right, so we need to cover one more thing, which is going to be the noise. I'm gonna, just turn this down and just get the same dumb, sound we were getting before. I'm gonna disable the effects. So this is gonna be the noise control. As soon as I provide more noise, we get noise. Super simple. Now, of course, if you turn off the oscillators, this doesn't care, doesn't give an F that the oscillators are off. It's its own thing. It's going to play the noise. Right? If you turn it off, turn it on. So of course, this one gives you a white kind of a noise, or a pink, which is a not, in your face kind of a sound. But this is something additional that you get that you might want, or you might use with the oscillators. Just provides a little bit of, tail. Notice if I turn it off, the sound changes. And with a little bit of effects. Alright, so that's the noise. So there's one more thing that we need to cover before we go to the next, the next section. And it's the sync, oscillator sync. Now, this is something very hard to explain with words. If you want a very, kind of a technical explanation of this, go to the web, put synthesis and then sync, and you will find a million descriptions or information about how this works, because you have many ways of getting this on different synthesizers. So I'm going to give you a lame explanation. So I'm going to go to default right here again. I'm going to go there. Maybe I did it. Maybe I forgot to do it. So, okay. So now the oscillator number 1 is going to play something. I'm going to turn off the oscillator number 2, and for now, the 3 as well. So I'm going to go to the 1, I'm going to select this, and I'm going to play the same dumb bass line. Cool. Right, so we're getting that sound. We know how it works now. So I'm going to go to the number 2, and I'm going to play it again, and turn the volume up. If I go to the 5th, we are getting a 5th. Again, we know this, and I'm playing the same waveform, same range. Okay. So what the sync is going to do is going to tell the other oscillator that pretty much is going to say, dude, I am the leader. I am the chosen one. So whatever I do, you will need to follow. So the oscillator number 2, now it's playing on a different frequency. That's why you get a 5th. But whenever we do sync, now the oscillator number 2 cannot do whatever it wants. It needs to be in sync or aligned to whatever the oscillator number 2 is doing. Oscillator number 1 is doing. So if I do play, the sound changes. So behind the scenes, what it's doing, it's restarting the cycle of the oscillator number 2 to be in sync with the oscillator number 1. That's why you get this hard sync hollow sound. And it doesn't matter what I do right here. If I change the semitones, notice that the sound changes just a little bit. But one thing that you notice is that it's not going out of tune. It's playing on the same tune. If I disable, some notes are gonna, be nice. Some other notes are gonna be bad. And it's because, of course, we are playing different parts, different semitones. But with the sync, this one needs to follow the oscillator number 1, so it will never go out of tune. But you get this hard, hollow sync sound. So, yeah, that's what it is. That's the sound of sync. Now, this is a very common control that you get pretty much on any synthesizer. It doesn't matter if it's an old synth or a very new synth. I got a Mini Moog and a Mini Moog now, so a Mini Log, and it has the sync control. It's something very common. It gives you this hard sync hollow sound. Now, alone, it sounds like crap, but if you provide a little bit of effect, sounds much better. And it's that sound, and it's something that you don't get just aligning the same, the same semitones and the same, just different, as a hollow sound. So that's it. That's the sync sound. Okay, so we are done with the video. Remember, this is a series. I'm going to be uploading one each day until I finish the series. And maybe you're wondering why you're not uploading everything at once. And it's because people get upset whenever you upload more than one video, because they get, a lot of videos on their subscription, view, and they get upset and they start unsubscribing, or, they give you the thumbs down, which is nonsense. I'm just giving you content, but that's why I need to do one a day until the series it's done. Okay, so we covered the oscillators, we covered the overload and the noise. On the next one, we are going to be covering the oscillator, the actual modulation, how modulation works on the synth. All right, so see you on the next one.